I'm R.A. Schwartz, along with my co-host, Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the WNBA Insider Show. Each week, we cover different topics important to the W, using X's and O's along with key stats to bring honest and critical analysis, holding nothing back. This week, we're continuing our overseas coverage with an interview with James Wade. Rachel, why don't you take it away?
All right, everyone, we are here. We are joined with newly named Chicago Sky head coach James Wade. But one thing that many people may not necessarily understand is his experience, if you will, overseas, through multiple countries, throughout Europe, throughout Belgium, the UK, Russia, all these things. Coach, you've got dual citizenship. We just talked about the fact that you're now learning your third language. You're headed back over there to Russia. This entire podcast right now is aimed with the goal of really helping educate just the fans, the WNBA fans, the people here in the States about what's going on overseas. And so we are so thankful that you're on here, especially being our first guest, to get a chance to talk about this stuff. And you are currently an assistant on one of the premier leagues within EuroLeague, UMMC. I'm going to butcher it. So, Coach, how do we even pronounce it? Is it ECAT?
Yeah, so that's where they shorten it up and say ECAT, but it's Ekaterinburg. And so some people, you always see the UMMC, that's the English version, and then you'll see UMGK, which is Ugimka, or UGMK, Ugimka, and it's Ekaterinburg. So that's the Russian version of it,
So not only are we educating the fans, we're also giving them a little language class too.
There you go. Yeah. And Coach, like ECAT is historically one of the most dominant premier Russian leagues and teams. I mean, we've looked at players from Maya Moore to Diana Taurasi to now currently one of your newly named player, Courtney Vandersloot, plays for you. Can you talk a little bit about just the history of ECAT in Russia and just the dominance of it and EuroLeague within itself?
Well, I'm gonna throw a shout out to my wife. Actually, ECAT, they won their first. They came on the scene really in 2003 when they won their first EuroLeague title, and they actually beat my wife's team in the finals after overtime. So, yeah, that was tough. And I was in the gym watching that. And so that's when they came on the scene, and then they went through some years where they didn't win, and they really came alive. I say in 2000, I want to say 2013, when they had the staff Sandy Brondello and Olaf Long. That was their second time winning it, and their first time in 10 years actually winning it. And then it was the age of Diana Taurasi, and she just led them on, a dominant streak, and where they would win two out of the next 4 or 5 championships in EuroLeague, and they didn't lose a Russian league title at that time. And great players passed through there: Candace Parker, Brittany Griner. I mean, the list goes on, and they've always put a lot into having the best players at their position. So that's where we are now.
Well, let me ask you this, Coach. How did you get involved in EuroLeague and ECAT in particular? How did you even get to that position where now you're in your second year as an assistant?
Well, it's a funny situation. Like, the basketball world is so small. My wife, she actually played for, she was actually, Ekaterinburg kind of recruited her for like two or three times during her career. And she chose not to go for us so we can be closer together. And so it was weird. Like, we never, we was like, okay, we didn't, choose to go during the time that she was a player, because I couldn't be there with her. And now I'm the one that, gets the opportunity to go. And I'm like, come on with me. Right. But Sandy Brondello and Olaf Long coached my wife at San Antonio. And, when they left San Antonio, I think Sandy, she continued to coach in the league, but they had some off time on their hands, and they were looking for a different style of play in Ekaterinburg. So they searched the WNBA, and they found 2 credible coaches, and they offered them contracts. But I always had a great relationship with them. And during that 2013 run that they had to the EuroLeague title, they actually called me to come and scout for them during the final 8. And, I did. We won a title, and the relationship just stayed strong during that time period. And when Sandy was about to step down because she had national team commitments and she was going to go full time in Phoenix, Olaf asked if I would replace her, and I was like, sure, why not?
Wow. So it's interesting. Like the basketball world, like you said, is extremely small. And this entire world that is going on overseas in these different countries is such a big part of it, especially when it comes to so many people involved with the WNBA, coaches, to players, to everyone involved. Can you talk a little bit about not necessarily level of competition? Feel free to get into that if you want, but the differences between EuroLeague versus the WNBA. What are some of the similarities? What are some of the differences? I know this is pretty open-ended, but for you, you see both sides of it year round. What are some adjustments that you have to make, and what are some of the biggest differences that you could just tell your average everyday fan?
I guess the biggest difference is you play in 2 different leagues. And that's a really big difference because in the 2 different leagues, they have different rules. The domestic leagues are really, since we're a Russian team, we play in a Russian domestic league where we play against all the Russian teams once a week. And what they're designed to do is really they have certain restrictions and certain protections for the Russian players. Because and the same thing goes in Turkey, the same thing goes in France. Because if they didn't have those restrictions, you would just give all your money to the 12 best players in the world and, just play them and not really, give that much thought to actually the Russian league, the Russian fans, and the Russian players who you're trying to, improve also. And I'm not saying that to say that, the Russian players are not the best players in the world. We actually have some good Russian players on our team that could play, that can and does play in the WNBA. But those restrictions help you protect Russian players and continue to grow the Russian league and the Russian players at the same time when you're playing in the Russian domestic league. The EuroLeague, which is international league for European players, doesn't have as many restrictions. You can have Europeans or foreigners with European passports, and you can sign as many as you want, and they can play up to those restrictions, and it's a different competition, and it's probably a little bit more prestigious because it's countries against countries,
So I do have to ask, does that mean that you in some situations would have a player who wouldn't play in the Russian league on your roster but would play in EuroLeague?
Yeah, so we actually have 7 foreigners. We have 7 foreigners, and when I mean foreigners, like 7 foreigners that aren't Russian. And so we can only play 4 of those foreigners in the Russian league. So you might we rotate them. So it might be a game where BG has put a lot on the court, and we might want to rest her because she played 35 minutes in EuroLeague and 35 minutes the game before in Russian league. So the next Russian league game, we might rest her that game. And the same goes for Jonquel Jones or Kayla McBride or Courtney Vandersloot. So that's how we do. It's hard to manage because it's a little bit like a soccer team or something like that. But it's worth it because at the end of the day, everybody feels involved. So it's pretty cool. They're really professional about it.
So it sounds like to me, as you're playing through these different leagues, I mean, is it comparable to like the women's NCAA season? Like, is that the amount of games that you guys are playing total, or do you play more, less than that?
It's in women's NCAA, you give them a cap of like 40 or something like that. I would say we play a little bit more. I would say we play a little bit more because we also have the Russian Cup. And we have other competitions too, like the Super Cup, which is like a weekend tournament, or the Super Cup is just like one game against the last 2 champions. So we always have these little cups and things that we play for too. So it's probably like 5 or 6 more games than the NCAA season.
Okay. I'm curious about Russia in particular. That is an interesting place that not a lot of people have had the opportunity to experience, let alone live in. What are some of the the biggest challenges you face, not just necessarily in Russia, but being abroad, whether it's language barriers. We've talked about style play a little bit, even just being an American coach within a different country. Do people always, are they accepting of that? What are the challenges you face day in and day out?
I mean, well, the difference for me is I come in with I come in with an open mind, you know, and so it's a little different for me. Having been in Europe since 2000, early 2000, 2001, um, I understand the differences, the language barrier, the language gaps, and, you know, understanding and listening and taking certain things in consideration that sometimes foreigners, they get off the plane, they don't take into consideration. So that's an experience within itself. Like it's difficult because everybody has pride in their country, and when you come, when you don't invest in that culture, and it can be difficult for you at times. But when you show them that you're invested, then they always have open arms. You know, so it's that's the cool part. The language barrier is always a thing, but Ekaterinburg has always been good about, you know, having everybody has their translator, so it's pretty cool. That part's cool. And then just being the time difference. You know, I'm 10 hours from Central Time, 10 hours different from Central Time. So, you know, the good thing about me is I don't sleep, so it's not a big thing. You know,
Right.
It's not a big thing. But
a good trait of a head coach.
Yeah, exactly. But for some people, it can be difficult because, you know, you want to talk to people when you're ready to talk, but they're working, and, you know, that can be tough. That can be tough. And if you don't have family with you, it can feel isolating at times. But it's the give and take of it. You're doing something that you love, but you're away from people that you love. So it's tough. It can be tough.
So I want to ask a few more detailed questions about coaching overseas. The first thing I really want to ask is, from your perspective, how are the expectations different for you as a WNBA coach versus you as a overseas coach? You know, scouting, things like that.
The thing is that when I put myself into a scout, I really put myself into it, and the players will tell you that I'm not going to shortcut it, even if, and sometimes I have to be smart, but because you always want to give your all. But some games, you know, in the Russian league that you're probably going to win by a lot, and you could take shortcuts and still be okay. But me, you know, I'm not a perfectionist by no means, because I know I'm not going to be perfect. But I don't want to shortchange the players. And I don't want to say, okay, we're going to win this game, and I want to respect the game. So I'm going to put everything into a scout, even if I know probably we're going to win by 30 or 40 points. That can be challenged. You can't do that in the WNBA. You can't shortcut, even if you wanted to. It's no game you're going to win by 40 or 30 that you know going into the game. You know, sometimes the forces align and you have these blowout games, but I've been in situations where we beat a team by 30 and we come back the next week and they beat us by 20. So, you know, that's how the WNBA is, and that's how it's competitive every night. Us having the roster that we have in Ekaterinburg, sometimes it's going to be games that we know we're going to win by a lot, but you have to motivate the players, because you have to learn every game that, you know, we have to have a connectivity that we're getting better every game, because it's not just today that we're playing for. We're playing for that weekend in April, where it's probably going to be tough because it's one game and you're out in the EuroLeague Final Four. And so it starts now.
Wow.
You know.
Yeah. So something I did want to talk about, speaking about EuroLeague, and I think you and Rachel kind of touched on this in an earlier question, but the style of play obviously is going to be slightly different. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, the stereotypes of Russian league style of play, Turkish league? Because in the EuroLeague, you're playing some of the best teams from across all of Europe, so you're probably seeing all these different styles of play.
Well, the thing is that what's popular now in Europe, what's really popular now in Europe, and especially in women's basketball, is the Spanish style of play. Last year,
yes,
last year in the Final Four, 3 of the 4 coaches, even they weren't coaches in Spain, Three of the four head coaches in the Final Four were Spanish coaches, and that's really like a really fluid. It's really fluid offense. It's not really like us when the ball is always in your best player's hand. They really, the ball moves and you have movement, just constant movement, constant movement. It's something that we like to say here, but we don't do as much as they really do it because with that Spanish style of play, with the ball having so much movement and you having multiple options, everybody's a threat more so to create. Everybody's a threat to create. I think here we want the ball in our best player's hand to create. Even though the ball moves, it moves to those players for them to create closeouts or for them to create offense. It can be different where, it can be your fifth option that's attacking a closeout to create for your best player. And it's different. It's different. It's different. The same, benefits, but it's very different.
Coach, thank you so much for your time, getting to pick your brain a little bit about just being overseas. There's so much to talk about. We could go on for hours about this, but you're a busy man. You've got a lot going on. And as we understand, actually headed back to Russia this weekend. So safe travels to you and best of luck to you this season. We'll be following, we'll be promoting you guys and getting you out there as much as possible so the fans over here can follow along. But thank you for the insight. Thank you for the knowledge. We appreciate it and looking forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.